we talking about practice. Not a game. We talking about practice.
Now, back to the After Practice Podcast with Lake Lewis.
Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the After Practice Podcast with myself, Lake Lewis. Appreciate you joining me. And before we get into things, as always, if you want to follow me on social media, you can follow me on Twitter at Lake Lewis. You can follow me on Instagram and Facebook at Lake Lewis Jr. And then, of course, you can go to sportsjourney.com, get some information from there. And on occasion, you might check me out on ABC and DC, doing a team breakdown. And speaking of team breakdown, the Washington Commanders, they are on the plate. They're on the hot seat, whatever you want to call it. They're the team right now that a lot of people are looking at, as well as the Seattle Seahawks. But for the sake of East Coast, West Coast, they're looking at the East Coast right now because of the Washington Commanders. And I say that because they're the only two teams left that have not named head coaches. And I think for a lot of fans out there, the news that Ben Johnson, that's the hot name from the Detroit Lions, the offensive coordinator, he's pulled himself out of the running for the Seahawks or the Commanders' job for that matter. He's pulled himself out of the running, and I think, they just lost to the San Francisco 49ers in the NFC Championship game on Sunday, a game where, say what you want, the offense for the Detroit Lions, which is orchestrated by Ben Johnson, their offensive coordinator, of course, he literally, I don't want to say didn't call the game aggressively in the fourth quarter, but I just think that it wasn't the best game plan in the fourth quarter. Detroit had that game well in hand. They were up 17 at some point in the game, and then all of a sudden the wheels fell off. And I know Dan Campbell, their head coach, is taking a lot of scrutiny and getting a lot of heat for going for it on some fourth downs and being uber aggressive. Well, I just think, they're a team that had a great year, a nice run. They just didn't know how to put together a full 60-minute game plan in that championship game, and they didn't know how to put San Francisco away. And we've seen the 49ers, not to stray, but we saw the 49ers show that they can come back because they did it the week before against the Green Bay Packers. I just think the Detroit Lions game plan in the fourth quarter, it was just not what I was expecting. They're a running football team, and I don't think they ran the football conservatively and consistently against the 49ers. In retrospect, they're missing out on an opportunity to be in Vegas for the Super Bowl where they probably should have been there. What does this do, though, now if you're the Commanders? Because everyone wanted Ben Johnson. I think the majority of the fan base out there wanted Ben Johnson. For the record, I wanted Mike McDonald. And I've been saying that as long as anyone wanted to hear me. I tweeted about it. It's there. It's in writing. I just wanted this guy because I think his defense has stopped and shut down all these great offenses and all these great young coordinators. So if you look at what he did to the Houston Texans and Bobby Slowick, shut them down. They didn't score in that playoff game. Houston had a punt return. And then if you look at what he did when they played Detroit in week 7, remember that Detroit came into that game in Baltimore and M&T Bank Stadium looking really good, and people wanted to see how both those teams were going to fare, and the Ravens steamrolled Detroit, and their defense in particular shut down Ben Johnson's Detroit offense. Detroit did not score. So, they had a field goal or two, but they did not score an offensive touchdown. And then, of course, if you look at last weekend's game or Sunday's game and the loss to the Kansas City Chiefs, it's kind of a two-way thing there because Patrick Mahomes looked in utter control the whole game. He really did. He put his stamp on the game, and that's why he's going back to the Super Bowl yet again. But if you were to tell me that the Baltimore Ravens defense of Ben McDonald, I'm thinking Ben McDonald used to play for the Orioles. Wow. A Mike McDonald defense would hold Patrick Mahomes and an Andy Reid offense to 3 points in 3 quarters. After the first quarter, after those first 2 drives, that was it pretty much for Kansas City. I'm telling you, get me a coach that can shut down these high-flying offenses with a really good defense. And now the onus on him would be if he were to be hired to find the right guy to run his offense. And I think if you can do that, you're sitting pretty good here. The guy has shown that he really does know how to run a good defense. They're aggressive. I know they kind of struggled because they're a zone defense. And I know they struggled a little bit with Patrick Mahomes killing them and eating them over the middle of the field. That's what he does. So it wasn't just a defensive scheme. You're talking about one of the GOATs in all of football at quarterback position. So he's going to do that to most defenses, no matter how good they are. But that defense really, really looked good. This is a young coordinator. This is a guy that, just wants his opportunity, probably just needs that opportunity. He's a guy that knows the territory, knows the terrain, the region, if you want to call it that, because Baltimore is right up the road from D.C., and he's proven himself. He's proven that he can run an NFL defense at a high level, and he's also proven that he can do it in college. He did it at the University of Michigan. So my thing is, you've been coached and been in the same room with the Harbaugh brothers, and say what you want about John Harbaugh, he has won a Super Bowl. He's won a Super Bowl in Baltimore, so he's won at the highest level. His brother, Jim Harbaugh, has won at every level where he's been and turned around some programs that haven't been the same since he's left them, and he just won a national championship at the University of Michigan. So, a matter of fact, I don't even want to do that because the father, Jack Harbaugh, has won. He won it, I think, Western Kentucky. So it's in the blood, So anyway, this guy's been in the same room with him, and I think he's picked up a lot. I've been saying for a long time, Washington has to go young. You don't want to go retread, So if you're going to go Bobby Slowick, who's the offensive coordinator for the Texans, so be it. If you're going to go McDonald, so be it. But I don't want to see the Dan Quinns of the world. And it's nothing personal against Dan Quinn. Really good coach. Great leader of men. Well, I will say that. And I've been saying that the Commanders do need to get someone that is a leader of men. However, I want them to get someone young, someone that can grow into the job, that can grow into the role. And, maybe he can be a guy that's, under, management, under the same system, the same setup for 10 years. That's what Washington hasn't seen in a long time. And the last coach that they had that long-term stability was Joe Gibbs. And I'm not talking about the second go-round of Joe Gibbs. I'm talking about the first go-round. Had stability, was in the building for a long time. 7 to 10 years is what I'm talking about. You want in a coach, not someone that's just finishing out his contract because the contract's coming to an end. We just saw that with Ron Rivera. We saw that with Jay Gruden. You don't want that. You saw that with Mike Shanahan. You don't want that. You want stability. And I think you get the stability by hiring a young gun, a young coach. I know some people want offense, and I totally understand you if you're in the camp of wanting an offensive coach because that's how the league is being played now. It's being played like that, but hence the Ravens defense, number 1 ranked defense in the league in multiple categories with a young coach who was coaching them up, and that's McDonald. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, how this develops. There's still some other candidates out there. Anthony Weaver, Aaron Glenn. There's still other worthy candidates out there. Don't forget about Eric Bieniemy. Eric Bieniemy, first year in Washington, did do some really good things with Sam Howell, but obviously we saw Sam Howell regress towards the end of the year. I don't know how much you want to put that on Eric Bieniemy or Sam Howell or both, but the point is, Eric Bieniemy has always been a guy that some people feel like really needs an opportunity to be a head coach. There's a lot of people in the fan base that still feels the same way. And I'm even a guy that thinks that the worst thing they can do is give it to Eric Bieniemy. No, I think that if they give it to Eric Bieniemy, there will be some continuity in that regard. So I know his name is still in the running. I'd be surprised, though, if Eric Bieniemy is named the head coach of the Commanders, because I think that some of these other guys that a lot of teams were looking at, are still out there. I mean, and there are, some older coaches out there as well. Pete Carroll's still sitting out there. Bill Belichick is still sitting out there. So with, Ben Johnson turning in, that he's not interested in leaving Detroit at this moment, he's going to stay. That does kind of change things a little bit. I'm not sure how much the trajectory changes drastically, but it does make you maybe go back to the well and say, you know what? Maybe we do talk to Bill Belichick if he's interested. Maybe we do talk to Pete Carroll, not just the Dan Quinns, the Aaron Glenns, the Anthony Weavers, the McDonalds, the Slowicks, So there's so many of these guys now, and Washington has to get this right. They've got to nail this. All these gentlemen I just named are worthy candidates, but Washington has to nail this and get it on the head so that they can move forward properly. Folks, if you think about this coaching hire isn't just for a future, of getting better in the future, but it could be present. You saw some teams recently turn things around overnight. You saw the Texans, what they did. They won a playoff game. They won their division, first-year head coach, and D'Amico Ryan, and then a first-year rookie quarterback in C.J. Stroud. So, they had an opportunity to, take their time and build and develop, and they are doing that, but they won immediately, and they won their division, and they put themselves in the playoffs, and they won a playoff game against the Cleveland Browns. So I think that has shown others around the league that your rebuild or your turnaround doesn't have to be 3-4 years. It can happen immediately if you get the right pieces in play. And that's, you get the right talent evaluators, you get the right GM, you get the right scouts, you get the right coach who can call the plays and help the development of men and be a true leader. And then, of course, your position group guys play a huge part in that. The most important part of the players on the field, the culture, guys that don't quit, guys that want to play. They don't want to ever give up. Washington has a chance to get all this right. They really, truly do. They've got a lot of money. I think $73 million in cap space to spend, the most in the league. They've got multiple draft picks, 5 to be exact, in the first 100 picks of this year's NFL draft, and 6 in the first 106 picks. So you've got some leverage if you want to trade back, if you want to trade around, move some picks. You have some things. And then, of course, there's talent in the building already. And I keep saying, a year ago, we were talking about the likes of Jahan Dotson, Brian Robinson, and these players have talent. Maybe in Jahan's situation, just the system wasn't predicated for him. Who knows? The point is, guys have talent on this roster. Some of them weren't being coached properly, especially on the defensive side of the ball. There's no getting around it. The defensive side of the ball failed Washington, the coaching, and now they have a chance to get it right. If you bring in, I go back to McDonald. If you go back and you bring him in as a first-year coach, we saw what he could do in Baltimore. There's no reason for me to think that he can't get the Daron Paynes and the John Allens and the Cam Curls if they re-sign him, which they should. Who's to say, Emmanuel Forbes was a number 1 draft pick, did not look like one, did not play like one, but perhaps he wasn't coached as one. So you get the right person in here, maybe everything comes on, the light bulbs come on and the switch is there, and you have this downhill aggressive defense as opposed to a defense that's laying on their heels. So as always, folks, again, it's just myself on this one today. If you want, you can follow me on social media at Lake Lewis on Twitter, Lake Lewis Jr. on Instagram and Facebook. And then you can go to sportsjourney.com and see some of my work, as well as some great colleagues of mine who are doing some awesome stuff, and they're on there as well. Their podcasts are on as well. And then you can subscribe to this podcast via most major podcast carriers, if it's Apple, Google, Amazon Music, Spotify, Spreaker. It's on there, so you can subscribe to that in the audio form, or you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is at sportsjourney.com, and you can subscribe to the podcast via that. And then you can go to sportsjourney.com and watch the podcast as well. So appreciate everybody out there as always, and we're going to be talking on Friday again. I'm going to have another one, and it might be about the new coach, so hang tight. We've got that. We've got some great sponsors we'll be talking to you about. Some innovative ones as well. We just got one recently. It's an innovative group of people, as well as the product that they have, and I can't wait to share it with you on Friday. And then, of course, I've got some other big news that we'll be talking about soon. So yeah, it's the off season, folks. This is what happens when your team doesn't make the playoffs, and I've seen this far too often covering the Commanders, previously the Redskins, but I think there are brighter days ahead. And I think if you're a fan, you should be excited this time, because you haven't seen a GM. You haven't seen how it's really done. You haven't seen, the young, hot coach that everybody wants that you get. Some of the coaching hires that have come through Washington have been surprise hires. I remember when Jay Gruden was the offensive coordinator in Cincinnati, and Washington hired him. I thought that caught some people off guard. I know it caught me off guard. Not saying he wasn't worthy, but I don't think people had Jay Gruden on their radar, and then he became the head coach. And when Mike Shanahan came out of retirement to coach, I think that kind of caught people off guard. When Joe Gibbs was brought back the second time, that caught people off guard, even though it was liked and warranted because of what he had done before. He's still revered in D.C., so no one had a problem with that. But some of the coaching hires, the Steve Spurriers of the world, the Marty Schottenheimers of the world, I don't know if there's been a coaching hire for the Commanders. Ron Rivera was a shock to a lot of people. People understood why, but it still was a shock nevertheless. I don't know if the Commanders have had a hire that had a buzz around it where it was a name or an ascending assistant coach that just was waiting for their opportunity. Well, now you've got several of them in this pool of coaches. It'll be interesting to see what the Commanders do, what Josh Harris and his ownership group and Adam Peters as the GM. It'll be interesting to see who they pluck as the person to lead this franchise back to glory and hopefully get them, in a playoff run. And I mean sooner than later. So it'll be interesting to see if they go old or if they go young, if they go experience or if they go no experience. But we'll find out clearly over the next day or two. And hopefully come Friday, we'll be able to talk about who the new coach is for the Washington Commanders. Appreciate you guys for joining. And as always, have a good one and be safe.